Thank you so much. You can sit with us. I'm honored to call Dr. Major General retired Judge Menachem Finkelstein, and now he is a judge. And his book about the seventh column and military ethics got the award of 2012. Please, Justice Menachem Finkelstein.
I understand that my role here
למעשה
אתנחתא
על משקל אתנחתא מוזיקלית,
אתנחתא
של שירת אלתרמן.
music interlude of the Alterman
הנושא שנדון
poems, because the subject of this conference is very well known to me regarding the challenges of war in dense areas. And my role as the military attorney general in the 21st century, but I have a problem that on topical issues I cannot talk, because when I got the permission from the courts, they told me that as a justice I cannot talk about topical issues. But together with that, I think that my words will have some topical echoing. Somebody once said that there's nothing more practical than a good theory. So I think that there's nothing more topical from an old poem by our poet laureate Natan Alterman. In two words, Alterman is a genius who lived between 1910 and 1970. He wrote various genres of literature, of poetry, songs, lyrical songs, plays. But the thing that we will remember most is from the seventh column. It was called that because it was the seventh column in the newspaper at the time, and he had a column that came out daily, and he became our national poet, the only actually after Bialik, because if we talk about national poets, we have Bialik, and then after that there was nobody, in fact, except Alterman, and he wrote this column for 25 years, from the midst of the Second World War until about the Six-Day War, or the 60s really. He related to issues that were topical at the time and gave them personal commentary, and there's some poems that became part and parcel of the Zionist myths in Israel. We learned it, and we all know them by heart, and it started that in the 40s he wrote about the Holocaust, about the illegal immigration and the fight against the British, the famous poem on the ships, and then about the independence of the state. And these poems, of course, are part of everybody's education here. He wrote 570 poems, and Shimon Peres actually said once, I don't remember any more impactful and important journalism than the seventh column. The seventh column was stronger than any article in the paper, because that was his way to write things. What I wanted to do here in the 15 minutes that I have is, instead of talking about 10 or 15 of his poems, to actually talk about one. And I think that I asked people to hand it to you. It's a very famous poem, but I thought that maybe it's half topical to say that I have no doubt what Natan Alterman would have done today had he seen, for example, an investigation committee or a court case that the results are pre-known, without mentioning now specific things. But we have an example for that, I don't know if we have enough adults here, but we know about the Tobiansky affair at the time. The Tobiansky affair was a story at the time that in 1948 there was a court-martial. The only time in the history of the IDF was a court-martial, and they executed a person that apparently, and everybody knows he was innocent, and Alterman really took it to heart, and he wrote 2 poems about it, and one of them he wrote, "Let us remember that investigation that judges like a jeep in a speed race without any brakes." And he related to all the distortions of that court, of the court-martial, and in general, I was alarmed that I will have to go back now after Protective Edge in 2014 to go back to 1948. But when I came, when Ofer Shelach was talking about Atlanta in 1864, then we can learn something also of the events of the past. So with your permission, I'd like to go back together with you to a very famous song or poem, and then we'll say a few words, but let's read it together. I saw that you have them. You have it in your hand, right? Everybody has it, so let's go back to, it's a bit sort of old-fashioned style of Natan Alterman. Everybody has it. You have it in English as well, I suppose. But I would give some words of introduction, and that is that Alterman was the greatest lovers of the IDF. He had a historiographic kind of perception that the state of Israel is the redemption of the Jewish people. It's not just by chance that there are extraordinary events here, but the redemption of the state of Israel is a change of form, a new form, and it has an extraordinary historic importance. And he thought that the IDF is the protector, the only protector of the state of Israel, and hence his love. And he had really love songs to the IDF. Today, of course, nobody accepts such a thing, but together with that, when the IDF did something which was abominable, he was the whip. And that's interesting because he's so unique, Natan Alterman, and he did things that are unbelievable in a way, because the person who wrote about the IDF, it's the only dam that can prevent throwing the state of Israel into the sea. And by the same token, he condemned so blatantly issues and events that were done either in the War of Liberation or later on, and he had a dispute, a constant dispute with Ben-Gurion. Although Alterman was a contradiction to people in the literature and in politics, they went against Ben-Gurion, whether on the right from the underground, sometimes on the left. And Shlonsky, the other poet, by the way, he called Alterman Ben-Gurion as if he's dragged after Ben-Gurion. And actually, Alterman was a Ben-Gurionist. He was a Labour Party, but he did not hesitate to contradict the great leader. And one of the great subjects was this subject, challenges in fighting or wars in dense populated areas, and from 48 onwards, every single year he wrote about things he didn't like. The most famous poem, and I'll choose that, is the one for this, and I think everybody knows it. And what we'll do in the 10 minutes I have left is let's read this poem. I'll tell you what it was written about. I'll tell you about Ben-Gurion's reaction, and then we shall part as friends. It was published on the 19th of November 48. And what was it written about? First of all, 2 minutes of poetry. What you have both in Hebrew and English In the beginning it's a motto, it's not the poem itself. In the very midst of the fighting days, to these things the defense minister was alerted. He's reading the first paragraph. Alterman is writing this. Eventually he edited his book, this deed of his, not of common ones, and inner strength. So he's giving compliments to David Ben-Gurion, the Prime Minister and Defense Minister, who did something that was evoked by this poem. This is a song about something that cannot be done. It's an abominable thing. Many civilians were killed unjustly as a result of an action by the IDF. It's a very strong poem, and Alterman, actually the only song that somebody ever did in the midst of war days, in the War of Independence, to go against the IDF, and that was him, Natan Alterman. There was another poet, Samech Yizhar, who also wrote The Captive, but the Alterman wrote this one, so let's read it out. Crossed on a jeep the occupied town, a youth fierce and armed, the lion-cub youth, and in the beaten street an old man and a woman pressed before him to the wall. And the youth smiled with milk teeth. I shall try the machine gun, and tried as the old man concealed his face, and his blood the wall covered. This is a short from the battles of liberty. Dears, there are fiercer, it's no secret. Our war claims, expressions, and poems. Good, it shall be sung then about this too. This too, for this, that's what the name is. Of course, we're talking about something that is very, very harsh. The nerves of the poet are in those exclamation marks, and then you have inverted commas, which is the reaction that sometimes you hear when people hear about atrocious things. So after the three verses, it becomes very, very harsh and blatant. It changes the direction. And it shall be a song of delicate matters, whose names are incidentally murdering. He calls a spade a spade. He says murdering, and it shall be sung of talks of knowing listeners, of soft laughter and forgive and forgo. Delicate matters in quote unquote. Okay, people say, well, that's a delicate matter. Do not say mere particulars are they in the glorious chapter. Particular and general are a pair by law. If the general so listens to the telling particular and does not detain him in a cell. So he says, yeah, it says some crazy. When you cut trees, then you have shrapnels, etc. So, and does not detain him in a cell, as we said, for those bearing arms, and we along with them, those in practice and those by a path of consent, are pressed with a memory of necessity, again, things that you hear, and revenge, into the realm of war criminals. So it's not murdering anymore, it's already war criminals now. Cruel is the war. The upright preacher with a fist from her shall be removed, but hence the decree of justice and the decree of compassion, may it be within her as cruel as something has to be done. And for the he's talking about the charm and the glory of the war, and they only contribute they're only looking for court-martials, for field court-martials. After a few months, he already writes a poem about court-martial, and then he talked about how much you have to condemn the court-martial when you didn't hear the principles, and that, of course, that's to be affair. Vanquished be the calmness that whispers indeed and fears its image in the mirror. Let the Hebrew soldiers stand. Let them defend against the numbness of the Hebrew public. And the people's war, which stood fearless facing the 7 armies of the kings of the east, shall not be feared. Do not tell in God, she is not cowardly like that. It's a strong and blatant poet. In university, you need 2 classes, but I want to relate to how Ben-Gurion reacted when he heard it, because Alterman was quite excited by it, and the question that the researchers are thinking today, what was it written about? And all that came with it. So,
אני אגיד קודם כל מה עשה בן גוריון.
First, I'll tell you what Ben-Gurion did. He saw this poem. It was published on Friday, November 1948, in the 7th column of the Davar newspaper, as usual. Alterman used to react very quickly to events, but Ben-Gurion also would react quickly. And then, on Sunday, Ben-Gurion sent a letter to Alterman. I didn't give you the letter, so I'll read it out. The letter says the following: Dear Alterman, chapeau for your moral expression of your last column in the paper. You were a voice, a clear and faithful voice to human conscience, that unless we have it these days, we will not deserve the glory that we're given until now. Ben-Gurion many times talked about glory, and then he becomes half a poet himself, and all of a sudden he's got this poetry of Alterman. A column, because this is like a tank.
בהוצאת משרד הביטחון ב-100,000 אקזמפלרים, שהיום זה עותקים, ולחלקו לכל איש צבא בישראל. אז הוא גילה אולי סוד כאן ביטחוני. ועכשיו אלתרמן הופך למעין אחשוורוש. אם אינך מתנגד לכך, יינתן הצו מיד לעשותו. כן, משהו כזה מלכותי. יינתן הצו מיד לעשותו. עכשיו, אפשר לחשוב שהוא שאל את רשותו של אלתרמן. כשהמכתב הזה כבר נכתב, הוא כבר חילק את זה לאנשי הצבא בישראל. עכשיו, יש לי כאן ספר, שלפעמים אני זוכר להביא אותו, אבל זה סקופ לא קטן, שמראה שבן גוריון חילק את השיר הזה. אגב, יש לנו בהוצאת משרד הביטחון שהוא באמת חילק את זה לחיילים, אבל יש לי כאן הוכחה ספרותית שהוא חילק את זה. היו שלושה אחים, אחד באצ"ל, אחד בלח"י ואחד בהגנה. אברהם ורד, זה נגיד יצחק ושמואל ורד. זה שהיה בלח"י, קראו לו אברהם ורד, וכשהוא סיים את המלחמה, הוא כתב ספר, לא ידוע, בטח הזל, סנה בוער באש. ואני רוצה באמצעות זה להראות לכם שני דברים. א', על מה נכתב השיר, וב', שסדנה דאר אחד הוא. כלומר, נגיד הבעיות שהיו לי בתקופתי בפרקליטות הצבאית, שהיו מתקיפים אותי מימין ומשמאל, והשאלות של מה אתם יפי נפש, או מה אתם נוקטים צעדים נגד חיילים, והיו טענות מכאן ומכאן, להראות לכם שאותו דבר היה בזמן אמת פעם. כלומר, דבר לא השתנה. אוקיי. דבר ראשון, על מה נכתב השיר? פולמוס. יש הטוענים שזה, יש לכם רעיונות? לוד. התגובה הראשונה, לוד. אין מי שתשאל אותו שלא יגיד כתגובה ראשונה לוד. או יש כאלה שטועים ואומרים גם לוד, זה נכון. אבל אני חושב שקוראים לעיר לוד. לוד אגב זה כינוי ספרותי למצרים. לודים זה מצרים. בספרות חז"ל מסוימת.
Okay, doesn't matter. Lod, the name is. Everybody says Lod because we know that there was an event there where many civilians were killed in Lod, but it doesn't hold water. Dear Yassin, no, it wasn't because that was
באפריל 48,
in April 48 and this was written in November.
אגב, מי שאמר
By
את
the
זה, אני
way,
חושב
anybody who said that, I think that when Ben-Gurion
כתב, עוד חי בליבי טור אחד
I
שכתבת
still
בעניין הזה,
remember one column that you wrote about
אני חושב
this.
שהוא מתכוון
I
בזה
think he
לדיר
does
יאסין,
mean Dir
אבל נעזוב
Yassin, the
את זה.
massacre, but let's
אז
leave that.
לוד
So
לא
Lod-
מסתבר. לא
No,
מסתבר כי לוד
doesn't
היה
figure because Lod
ביולי
was
48.
in
אלתרמן
July.
היה תמיד כותב
Alterman always used to write
קרוב
close to
לאירוע,
the event.
ותכף אני אראה עוד דבר בעניין הזה. שלום רב. אז זה לא מסתבר.
So that doesn't
אז היו כאלה
figure.
שאמרו,
So some people said that it
חיים
was,
גורי למשל,
you know, the poet
Shalom,
Chaim
אדוני.
Guri.
אתה כאן הבוס, לא? פה אין בוס, בסדר. אז יש חיים גורי למשל,
Chaim
כששמע את
Guri, the
הדברים,
poet, when he
הוא
heard
חשב
this, he
שזה
thought
על באר
that
שבע,
it's about
אני חושב.
an incident in Be'er Sheva, I think.
מה שהכי נראה, ואת זה
But
גם כתבתי
what
בספר,
we
והיום
think, and I
כבר
wrote it
חוקרים
in
חושבים
my book, you know, most
שזה
of
אירוע
the
שהיה
researchers
במסגרת
think
מבצע
that it's
יואב
something that had to do with the
ב-29
Yoav operation
לאוקטובר
on the
48,
29th of October 48,
כאשר נכבש כפר
when
שנקרא
a
דוויינה,
village was conquered called
בשיפולים
Gweimer,
המערביים של דרום הר חברון.
near to
היום
Hebron Mount.
ישב שם, יושב קיבוץ המציע,
Today there's a
ממש
kibbutz
כמעט על חורבות
over
הכפר
there
הזה.
on the
היה
ruins
שם
of that
פעולה
village. There was an
שכבשו את
action.
הכפר,
They
כנראה היה
conquered the
כמה
village.
יריות בודדות,
Apparently a
אבל
few
בעקבות זה
shots
היו
only, but
חקירות,
following that there were all sorts of
והתברר
investigations, and
שעשרות
apparently
רבות
many
של
scores
תושבי הכפר
of
נהרגו על ידי
citizens
צה"ל.
were killed by the IDF.
אני לא רוצה לדבר על
I
המשמעויות
don't want
של
to
זה,
talk
זה לא
about
לעכשיו, אבל יגאל אלון
the
באיזשהו מקום
consequences, but
היה גינוי ברור,
General Alon at the time, because the UN condemned it. We didn't know about it here, but Alon, who was the commander of the forefront, he said that following that action, IDF couldn't continue to advance.
הדבר הזה גם מבחינה תועלתנית היה
So that
חמור.
was really
אבל כמו
a
שאמרתי,
problem. But as
אני
I
רוצה
said,
להראות לכם
I want to
אדם
show you a
שהשתתף,
person who
חייל פשוט,
participated, a simple soldier
חפש, שהשתתף
who
בקרב הזה על
participated
כיבוש
in this
דוויינה,
battle
שלא
to
היה קרב
conquer
למעשה.
Dwemer. It
הוא
wasn't a
כותב
battle.
ספר,
And he wrote a book,
והוא מספר בשפה
and
שלו
he
ב-1949
tells in his own language in 49
רצו להגיע
that they
לחברון.
wanted to get to
דומה
Hebron,
היה
and it
שנשכח,
seems that,
אני, ציטוט אחד שאני
one
אקרא,
quote,
דומה היה
it
שנשכח
seems
נהרג
that
לתוך השעמום.
we are going to fall into boredom, but somebody took the pleasure away. Who is that somebody? Instead of tell us to go east to revenge Hebron and the Etzion cluster, we got a poem by somebody, Nathan A. You know, he used to sign like that, Natan Alterman. You say Nathan A. And this, and then he says that he quotes some of the poem, and where he calls them war criminals. So this is a good evidence. There are others that if he brings this, following the conquering of this village, and they got it for what they did, this is a good evidence, good proof. But there are others, and recently Ziva Shamir and Dan Laor, these are two big researchers of Natan Alterman's work. Currently, they're professors of literature. They wrote extensively about it, that apparently it is this Dwemer village, but what I'm interested in is to show you arguments in real time. This is a quote of the simple soldier. Following Natan Alterman's column, he didn't know who it was, but and following the activities, there were great disputes and great arguments. How can you allow to publish such a thing in the army? One was very upset. Don't they think that such poems can reduce the military morale? Aren't they things that can lead us to failure in war? If the war is called war crimes, how can I go to battle that before every shot I'll have to consider whether killing this one will be a war crime or not? And who knows if I'm not going to be killed by the enemy? That's exactly what the poet is writing. And his songs are now given to us. So that was one thing. Somebody else tried to mitigate this anger and to say the following: yes, but we have to make sure not just to kill Arabs. We are a moral nation. We are fighting just because we are forced to fight. And the poet wants to make us aware against certain deeds among the soldiers because he thinks they're impacted by public opinion. The poet just wants to explain to the Jewish population that in the uncensored praise of the army, it encourages the soldiers to do war crimes. So this, you know, you see, that was a party, the first party, the second party, and now we go back to first party. Defending the poet made him very angry. All over, people were shouting, the soldiers, let him preach to the Arabs, let him go himself to fight, and we'll see if he can distinguish between war and war crimes. What, the Egyptian soldier is not innocent? He also has to go to battle. And everybody was shouting and yelling. Things really stormed the spirit of the guys, etc., etc., etc. So this is a description from 49 in a very unknown book, which is just a simple soldier, so what should show us as proof about what it was written, and also to tell us that things that happened at the time will happen in the future and forever. Now I have to finish, right? Then I'll finish with one sentence. No, I'm not going to finish with one sentence. Another Alterman. Look, when I start talking about this, I have a few chapters. One is Alterman and the Jewish subject. It's very important. I try to show, just in a few verses, that even a Jewish person has memories. That's what he said. But I wanted to say that Alterman wrote a book. And in 1957, it's a book which is half philosophical and half historical, about his insights about the establishment of the State of Israel in hindsight. It's not such a known book. It's difficult to read, and it's called The City of the Dove of Natan Alterman in 57. So he took a motif of the struggle of Jacob with the angel in the portion of the week. I'm finishing in 60 seconds. Okay, 40. And there's a part there of the struggle of Jacob against the angel, and then Yaakov starts limping. You remember that. And he used that motif a lot, but in the City of the Dove, he says, but this nation just will continue to limp a little bit. Also, when it has a new body as a state, that was the state that was established on what used to be the Jewish nation at the time, and it will be recognized when it actually marches. We'll still see that failure, which is innate in the Jewish people. The blemish in the Jewish nation, even if it's completely healed, it's still noticeable. So this is not a natural thing for the people of Israel, for the Jews, and you have to do things cautiously.